Good afternoon, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for taking part in this webinar today. And this webinar, of course, as you know, is organized and facilitated by the Directorate of Higher Education Reviews of the Education and Training Quality Authority, the BQA of the Kingdom of Bahrain. And it really is a pleasure for me to be your facilitator for today. And we are really honored to have among us a group of distinguished speakers and presenters from different parts of the world. And there will be some of our colleagues here at the BQA also contributing to this important webinar. As you know, the title of this webinar is Moving Forward, External Quality Assurance Reviews of Higher Education Programs Post-COVID-19 Outbreak. And before proceeding with any of the presentations or introducing our guest speakers for today, which many of them are in parts of the world where it is evening time now, so we tell them good evening. So before doing that, I would like to cordially invite Her Excellency, Dr. Jawahir Shaheen Mdahki, the Chief Executive of the BQA, to present her welcoming address. So Dr. Jawahir, please, if you may.
Thank you very much, Dr. Nina. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الأخوة والأخوات الأفاضل، ضيوفنا الكرام، زملائي الأعزاء، السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. يشرفنا مشاركتكم معنا اليوم في منتدى هيئة جودة التعليم والتدريب Moving Forward External Quality Assurance Reviews of Higher Education Programs Post-COVID-19 Outbreak. This forum, organized by the Higher Education Review Directorate and the Education and Training Quality Authority, BQA, in the Kingdom of Bahrain, it is done during such critical time that the world is passing by with COVID-19 pandemic and its effect. This pandemic changed the way we view matters in all aspects, and the matter that we are concerned with today is education. According to the United Nations General Secretary, the COVID-19 pandemic has created the largest disruption to education in history, as over 1 billion students were affected by COVID-19 school closures. As we all witnessed, there has been many negative effects of this pandemic. But the past few months were a learning experience for all of us. And from this learning, we need to put plans for the future and how to act in such situations swiftly and smoothly, especially as the current situation is unfortunately expected to continue for an unknown while. The Kingdom of Bahrain, as all other countries, took steps to protect its population's health and safety, among which is the school closure and the transition in education to distant learning. Thanks to God and the long-term vision of our country's leaders, this transition was not difficult on educational institutions, especially in higher education. This was due to the well-established IT infrastructure in Bahrain, which facilitated this movement of a transition in education mode. Now, distant learning, e-learning, and the hybrid learning are the new normal. The new normal that we need to get used to. Accordingly, there is a need to review the legislation regarding its recognition to obtain a more sustainable education for our future generations. Today, our guest speakers will share their experience since the COVID-19 outbreak, which will present their views of how to deal during such unusual situations, In turn, these views will give us a wider learning experience and adds to how we form our move forward in the education system, each in his or her own country. Before I conclude, and on behalf of the BQA, I would like to express my sincere thanks and appreciation to our guest speakers for their willingness and time to contribute to our webinar today. Dr. Sheikha Lubna Al Khalifa, Dr. Karen Trailer, Dr. Mark Frederick, Ms. Dottie Christo Fersen, Ms. Emily Judy, and our presenter, Dr. Nina Abdelrazik. I would also like to extend my sincere appreciation to my colleagues, Dr. Hayal Mannai, General Director of Education and Training Reviews, Dr. Lubna Al Khalifa, Director of Higher Education Reviews, and all colleagues in the Directorate and Communication Office for their efforts to arrange for this successful event with your kind participation. Thank you all and wish you a great and beneficiary time in this webinar today. I look forward to your participation in our future events. Thank you very much. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah wa barakatuh. Thank you. The floor is yours, yes.
Yes. Okay. Thank you very much, Dr. Jawahir, for your warm and insightful address. Before I introduce our next presenter, I would just like to inform our attendees that every presentation is going to be for about 15 minutes, and it will be followed by a summary of the main points of the presentation. And then there's going to be some time left for the panel members to address the questions posed by the attendees. However, what we would like to kindly ask our attendees to do is, while the presenters are presenting, to actually type in their questions in the Zoom feature for the questions. And we are going to try as much as possible to have our panelists address the questions, maybe not all, but some of them. And in addition to this, all of this webinar is being recorded, and so it will be published for anyone who would like to return to it at any other time. It will be available for future audience. So again, thank you, Dr. Jawahir. And now to move on to our next speaker, we have with us the Director of the Directorate of Higher Education Reviews of the BQA, Dr. Sheikha Lubna Al Khalifa, who is going to be giving us an overview of the main efforts that were basically done by the BQA, especially by the Directorate of Higher Education Reviews after the COVID-19 outbreak. So her presentation is titled, as you can see, BQA Efforts Post-COVID-19 Outbreak. And so without further ado, Dr. Lubna, if you may please begin your presentation.
My class, sorry about that. It's now.
Yes, Dr. Lubna, we can now
hear me.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Sorry about the interruption. Okay, honorable guest and speaker, it's a pleasure for me today to present the BQA effort during or post the outbreak of COVID-19. As Dr. Jawahir pointed out, this circumstances exceptional, and we felt it or went through it all over the world. It's not limited to one continent or one place. And with the move to remote teaching and learning, the BQA took a number of initiatives under the leadership of Her Excellency Dr. Jawahar Mtahki. And it's a pleasure for me to present the initiative and to share with you our experience and the outcome of the initiatives that we took in the last few months. I will start first quickly going through the main BQA function and the function of the Directorate of Higher Education Review, going to the initiatives that have been taken and the outcome of the efforts and the initiatives that's been taken during this period. First, the main function of the BQA, of course, is to carry out external quality assurance review for all the education institution operating in Bahrain, and which are supervised by different entity like the Ministry of Education, the Higher Education Council, and in some cases even the Ministry of Labor. A second main function is conducting the national examination for primary and secondary school in some major core subject. And also the Education and Training Quality Authority is managing and developing the national qualification framework since 2012. The main purpose of the Directorate of Higher Education Review, of course, is to enhance the quality of higher education, ensure accountability, and spreading quality assurance culture as well as good practices. But of course, the main goal is to enhance the reputation of higher education in Bahrain, locally, regionally, and internationally. We actually conduct two types of review, institutional review and program review. These reviews are conducted against a set of standards and indicators leading to judgment, and we strongly believe that external quality assurance can never replace the internal quality assurance, and that the higher education institutions themselves are responsible for the quality of their program and services. Going through the institutional review framework, it composed of 8 standards and 25 indicators, in addition to a set of expectations covering governance, quality assurance, learning resources, teaching learning, support, human resource management, research, and community engagement. In addition to the institutional review framework, we have also the academic program review framework, which complements the institutional review. It's composed of 4 standard, 21 indicators, as well as different expectations covering the learning program in terms of curriculum, learning outcome, research, teaching, and learning method, assessment method. Also, the program are reviewed to check whether they are fit for purpose, efficiency in terms of admission, support provided for faculty and student, the learning management system. We also look at the academic standard of the student and graduate in terms of their achievement, their work, the capstone project, and the employability. And finally, of course, we look at the quality assurance mechanism in relation to the program, the benchmarking, the survey, and the continuous improvement through continuous regular yearly and periodic reviews. Of course, I went through that very quickly because the main focus here is about the effort of the BQE following the resolution that was issued here in Bahrain on 11 of March 2020 to move to remote teaching and learning, and the decision was reached by an executive committee under the leadership of His Royal Highness Prince Salman bin Hamad Al Khalifa, our Crown Prince. And following that resolution, we had actually 2 main initiatives. First one is to benchmarking the review framework that I went through very quickly, as well as the evaluation of remote teaching and learning. Benchmarking here, it was conducted in a sense, we looked at the local entity as well as international organization following the move to remote instruction. They issue some instructions, they issue some guidelines to help higher education institution in that move. So we look at at this kind of instruction to see whether our framework or the expectation included in the framework covers that in terms of academic standard, assessment, support, and the training provided for student and faculty member. We also looked at the framework and the guideline toolkits, best practice issued by reputable international organizations such as the Tertiary Education Quality and Standard Agency of Australia, SHIA in the United States, INCA in Europe, as well as the Hong Kong Council for Accreditation of Academic and Vocational Qualification, in order to see that our framework can cover remote teaching and learning. The other things that we did, we evaluate the remote teaching and learning, and in all the higher education institutions that are supervised by the Higher Education Council, and actually they going through the review conducted by the BQA. And these are actually the total 14 higher education institutions. The total number of students is around 44,000 students. Most of them actually studying in the two public higher education institutions. In order to evaluate the experience from the beginning, the move to remote instruction, we sent questionnaire for faculty member and for student as well. For we sent self-evaluation form for the higher education institution, and actually we reviewed the feature in the learning management system in this institution, and we conduct 2 virtual review for 2 higher education institutions, 1 public and 1 private. And actually I should mention here that the level of cooperation was very high, and all the 14 institutions provided us with the necessary information in the timelines and the deadlines that were set per the BQA. It's really was very interesting for us. I mean, the most things that we look for is the responses of faculty member and of course the student. So in response to our questionnaire, we received 656 from faculty member. Most of them were actually from the private higher education institution. And most were non-Bahraini male, and the rank was varied from professor, associate professor, lecturer, instructor, and actually the majority had more than 10-year teaching experience. The questionnaires that we deliver for them cover different dimensions. It's included assessing usage, readiness, support, their preference, interaction with student, and course design. And actually the outcome was very positive, because in the response, the positive response, that they agree and strongly agree that they have good access, and the readiness and the support level was high. It was actually ranging from 95% to 83%. So it's considerably very high level of satisfaction. But we noted that in terms of preference, there was like a significant percentage, around almost 35%, actually were not in favor to the move of remote instruction in general. Comparing between the private and the government institution, we saw it was very clear from the responses that the level of satisfaction was higher in the private institution, since the positive responses strongly agree with that adequacy of the level of support and access and so on was higher, but in some cases was not higher by a very big margin. Comparing between the female and male responses, slightly higher for the positive responses, slightly higher for the female, but they are really quite similar. Moving to the student, and this was the most interesting questionnaires that we look at and analyze, because students, of course, are the focus and the purpose of the quality assurance, to make sure that they are getting proper education whether it is face-to-face or remote instruction. And actually, we received around almost 5,000 response from them. Majority of the students were female from public institutions that we received response from. Majority were Bahraini and doing their graduate study, at bachelor level, and their age group was in between 16 and 21. Again, we asked them similar question to faculty member, assessing similar dimension with regard to their preference, interaction with peer, with instruction, course design, the support, level of support that's been given, the readiness, the assessment usage. And we noted that the positive responses were much higher, with them agree or strongly agree that they have good access, readiness, and good support, and the course design was fit for purpose and covers the learning outcome. But still, it's notable that the level of satisfaction lower than faculty member compared with the result I just shared a few minutes ago. Comparing between student in private and public institution, it was very clearly that the level of satisfaction was higher in the private institution. It might due to the number, because most of the students actually studying in the two public institutions that we have in Bahrain, but it was clear that there is a significant difference in the answer of the student from government university and private university, and the more higher level of satisfaction in the private institution. Comparing between the male and female student, there is a difference with higher level of satisfaction among the female student population compared to the male population. Surprising maybe with regard to preference, since the response of the male student was slightly higher, that they actually prefer in terms of their preference of remote instruction. The main outcome of studying this experience, studying the move from face-to-face to remote teaching and learning through the questionnaire, which also allows the student and the faculty member to write their comment, and through the study of the self-evaluation forms that were filled by the higher education institution, as well as the studies that we did for two higher education institutions and checking the learning management system. We noted the several good practice. We noted that the efficiency of the ICT infrastructure in most institutions that enables them to move swiftly to remote teaching and learning. We also noted that most institutions, they had ready operational plans that deal with risk management and enables them to continue under this stressful situation. Most of the institutions benefit from the feature available in the learning management system. Also, the level of support was high, and the response to the grievance and complaint received from the student, and actually in some institutions also they post praise. It's not only about receiving a complaint or dealing with problems the student have, but also allow the student to appreciate their faculty and their institution for good practices. Also, most of the institution provided students with manual guidelines, short video on their website to enable them to move to remote teaching and learning. Most of the course files were uploaded electronically, and the higher education institution, they have accustomed and before to have regular tracking report about the use of the learning management system, enable higher management to follow and to ensure that the academic standards are maintained. And also we noted that there was more care taking with the student with special need and student facing financial difficulty because post-COVID-19 in some institution, and all are, we noted that as best practice from part of the higher education institution during this difficult time. Also, we noted or based on this study, we reached some recommendation Still, there is a need to ensure that all students have access to computer and stable internet. There is also a need to put more emphasis on learning and formative assessment method. There is actually a need to look and to find alternative plan for work-based learning and practical courses, because some of these courses were difficult to be continued during the last period and with the COVID-19 situation and remote instruction. Also, actually, this is from the questionnaire. Faculty members themselves, they felt that they need more training on designing e-courses and on assessment to ensure the e-assessment to ensure the transparency and the fairness of student evaluation. Another thing that we noted is very important that during this period is that for higher education institutions to continue assessing the faculty and the student satisfaction regularly to find to be able to cope and improve the service provided, especially during remote instruction. Another thing which very important is academic integrity and to ensure the credibility and the fairness of student grade. It was it's also important to ensure the appropriateness of the workload, with many students complaining that the workload actually become more during the remote teaching and learning. And actually from the result of the questionnaire, it was very clear that, and the responses of faculty members, that the level of interaction between the student themselves and with the faculty member need more improvement in virtual classes. And another, and finally, and in the presentation was our last recommendation, which has to do with ethic and etiquette of communication via the internet. While we have some faculty members, they said that maybe it's kind of a 24-hour response to their student inquiry and complain, and they felt maybe there should be some rule and guideline about that for the student to know when they can communicate, interact with their instructor. And finally, I thank you for your attention. It was really a pleasure sharing with you the studies that we did in the last few months and the outcomes of it. Thank you very much, and I leave the floor for Dr. Nina.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Lubna, for highlighting BQA's core functions represented by the Directorate of Higher Education Reviews. You clearly touched upon the main initiatives taken by the Directorate in response to the COVID-19 outbreak, from benchmarking exercises of the DHR frameworks to e-learning surveys of main higher education stakeholders, and even online reviews of public and private institutions of higher learning. And your exposition really of the results gathered summarized basically the main conclusions and the recommendations arrived at from the evaluation processes conducted. And you identified best practices like the availability of efficient ICT infrastructure and related operational plans and learning management systems, effective professional development and training opportunities for students and for staff, support for students with special needs and those with financial difficulties. And at the same time, you highlighted recommendations in the process, mainly recommendations to access to technology and basically the interaction of students in online environments, e-courses, work-based learning, practical courses, online assessments, and basically a lot of recommendations that we are seeing elsewhere in the world. So what we're going to do now is we are just going to turn to take a couple of questions from our attendees. And I have two questions actually. The first one is about the future direction of the reviews that are going to be conducted by the Directorate of Higher Education. Like, what is the approach that is going to be used from now on, given the COVID-19 situation?
From now on, actually, we studied the situation, and actually by conducting the two virtual review for two higher education institutions, one public and one private, in a few months ago, we felt that we are able to go ahead, because it's very important to ensure the quality of teaching and learning, especially during this period. So we can not stop the work or delay the work. And we saw that in other part of the world, they continue doing quality assuring for academic program and institution, as well as accreditation activity was also are taking place in this region, like in Saudi Arabia. And also we are lucky today to have Dr. Mark Frederick, which will hear about their experience of online review in Netherlands. And so so this is directions that we are heading on, is to continue our work, but of course the site visit will be replaced with virtual reviews.
Okay. Okay, thank you, Dr. Lubna. There's one more question. The question says, would you say is the strongest area of response from the higher education institutions reviewed by the Directorate of Higher Education Reviews to the COVID-19 situation? Based on the preliminary evaluation of the DHR, the Directorate of Higher Education Reviews, what would you say is the strongest area of response that has taken place? In your opinion, of course.
In my opinion, actually, there was, good response from the different entities that are responsible for higher education institution, starting from the Higher Education Council issuing guidelines and instruction for the higher education institution in order to help them to move to remote teaching and learning. And one thing that, Her Excellency Dr. Jawahar pointed out, most of higher education institutions had the infrastructure. Part of it, because in our institutional review framework, as well in program review framework, we actually put emphasis on e-learning, blended learning, and the importance of the learning management system, and encourage the institution to move more for blended learning, particularly the government institution with a higher number of students. There were many recommendations about that. And also that some of the institutions, they had many features available on the learning management system, most of them using Blackboard or similar learning management system. And we always encourage to have more like interactive and with their students. So I think the move was swift in most higher education institutions. So having the infrastructure, of course, is very important. And also we noted that because this time was very unprecedented, and it required kind of a humanitarian approach. And we felt like the faculty member and everybody were like jumping in and trying to help as much possible as they can, and do a different initiative from their part. and perhaps we felt that there were a lot of good practice, but because of the short and quick responses was especially from the senior management, but it was done in very short period and still not studied. So it's good to look at all the responses that has been taken, evaluated, and improving on it. And but I think that it's a level of cooperation and that everyone was trying to move through such difficult circumstances.
Okay, thank you very much again, Dr. Lubna, for your valuable contribution. Now it's time to move on to our first presentation from overseas, and particularly from Australia. This is a joint presentation titled The Importance of External Quality Assurance for All Modes of Delivery. And it's going to be delivered by our distinguished speaker, the Director of Engagement Group of TEXA, the Tertiary Education Quality and Standards Agency in Australia, Dr. Karen Treloar, and joined with Miss Emily Good, who's the Manager of International and Industry Professional Bodies, also at TEXA. Dr. Treloar is involved in building and developing all elements of partnerships with international quality assurance agencies and governments, and works on quality projects in countries such as Oman, South Africa, Sri Lanka, and Vietnam. While Ms. Good is involved in developing and maintaining TEXA's strong relationships with international quality assurance agencies and professional accreditation bodies. Thus, distinguished attendees, please join me in welcoming to the floor Dr. Karen Treloar and Ms. Emily Good.
Thank you very much, Nina, for that very warm introduction. And good afternoon to all our higher ed colleagues in Bahrain. It's so lovely to be here. Emily and I are in lockdown and have been in lockdown for probably 8 weeks. So I feel like I'm coming out to visit you all in talking to you. I'm going to tell you the story today of how TEXA handled COVID. And you'll see that there's a lot of very similar themes that Dr. Lobner has presented. So it's very good for us to hear that it validates what TEXA has done. So when COVID hit, there was a flurry. So TEXA had to think about what it could do to best support its providers. I should say that in Australia, we have 178 providers. That ranges from very large universities to very small niche colleges. We knew that all of our providers had been assessed against the higher ed threshold standards that some of you may know that are very similar to your standards. So we knew that most of them were in really good positions health-wise. We also knew that our standards about assessing quality, and they're not concerned about mode of delivery. So we are very focused on learning outcomes. So we also knew that many of our providers had a very long and strong history in the delivery of online education. So as I just said, we're also very focused on the learning outcomes and how students are supported to achieve the learning outcomes. So we took an approach overall which focused on flexibility and a reduction in the administrative burden of regulation. And this was a key theme in all of our regulatory work with providers over the pandemic. So we've given extensions, we've rescheduled assessments, we've been in regular engagement with our providers to see that they're going okay. We also took a quality enhancement approach to our role in working with providers, and particularly in working around the issue of online learning over the pandemic. So what we've done is develop many good practice and guidance for providers transitioning to online learning, because we got calls from many of our providers that were small colleges and they'd never delivered online, or they had really rudimentary systems in place, and all of a sudden they had to put a whole student cohort online quickly. So this was our target market in the work we did. We then put our feelers out to our global higher ed community, and we began to collect resources, and then the resources came in, and we very quickly were able to establish and build a repository of information around online learning. Now, I refer you all to our website. There's a wealth of information there. You probably have a wealth of information of your own. If there's anything that you'd like to share with us, we'd love to receive your information. So we set the website up around some key headings. We thought, well, some providers are going to have to learn how to get started and what they have to do. As Dr. Lobner said, enabling staff to work online was a big issue, and it's still a big issue. We knew that when COVID hit, it was at the beginning of semester. So we knew that assessment and issues around assessment and assessment integrity were going to be really big issues that we had to prepare our providers for. The student experience is very important to all of us at TEXA, and that was another area which I will continue to talk about, which we are still very concerned about, as one of TEXA's roles is to protect students. We had such a wealth of information from all our colleagues globally that we made a section international perspective, and then we listed all the webinars and podcasts that we were hearing about around the traps. I'm going to hand over to Emily now, who's going to tell you about our webinar series, which was TEXA's first webinar series, so we were very excited.
Yes, hello everybody. So as part of TEXA's commitment to provide the sector with practical advice in the transition to online learning, we chose to collaborate with RMIT University to produce a weekly webinar series aimed at discussing practical approaches to online learning. The series, which was titled Going Online, Reimagining Teaching and Learning, enabled experts to talk about all aspects of online learning. There were two sessions in particular that were that were spoken about quite a lot by our audience, and these were assessment integrity and designing curriculum for an online learning environment. And that session gave practical hands-on advice to focus on practical placements. All 6 episodes of the series are available on the TEXA website and the TEXA YouTube channel. If we just go to the next page, Karen.
Oh, sorry.
That's okay. So yes, all 6 episodes of the series are available on the TEXA website and the YouTube channel, and I would encourage you to have a look at them. They're very interesting. I've put the URL up the top of the slide as well, so it's easy to find. The series was really well attended from many areas of the sector, including many international colleagues, and overall, we had probably over 1,000 attendees attend throughout the series. We also developed 6 question sheets for providers, which answered all of the unanswered questions that we had throughout the series. These question sheets can be found on the TEXA website on the URL above as well, and they address practical advice aimed to assist providers in their transition to online learning. Okay, back over to Karen.
We then moved and developed an experts advice hub. We had, so in this area of the web, we approached experts, particularly in the area of assessment, because of the timing of when COVID was, and we knew that providers would be grappling with. So we had a series of academics write really short targeted pieces of advice for different aspects of assessment, or how to improve students' online experience, a statement of what students should expect to study online. And we're continuing to develop these in line with the needs of the sector. We've also spent a lot of time and will be spending a lot more time around the area of academic integrity. Now, this is a big issue globally, particularly contract cheating. So we had a team of expert academics last year develop a toolkit for us, led by Professor Tracy Brettag. We also had that team run workshops all around Australia. We've got records available of that workshop, and there's a slide pack there. We're in the process of developing a contract cheating website. We've just had legislation go through Parliament in Australia, which now enables us to block websites of contract cheating companies. So this will be a big focus of the agency in the next few months. We're also looking at how we develop resources to support students around the issues of contract cheating, because we've met a couple of times with our student groups and they've told us that they're being basically stalked by contract cheating companies. So we're looking at what we can do to develop and support students and develop materials in other languages. So we will continue to share good practice across the sector in this area. We also were lucky enough to win a grant to develop a toolkit for around academic integrity and contract cheating. And we did this for our international colleagues, because we as an agency have done a lot of work in this area, and we thought we'd like to share what we've learned with our other colleagues. So this toolkit came out recently, and that's available on the Inquiry website and on our website. Or we can send you a copy if you're interested. Emily.
Right. So very early on in the COVID pandemic, we realised that we had to provide practical advice for students who were very quickly transitioning to online learning. And as a result, we developed a suite of resources that was aimed at helping students find information easily to assist their learning. TEXA has a student expert advisory group. So to assist us in developing the resources, we engage the students to find out what sort of information they would like to see on the website, what resources they would like us to link in. So we managed to speak to quite a lot of the student sector to understand what information that they wanted for us, in particular during the pandemic. These resources that are available online consist of a number of TEXA's own resources, and we also have provided links to other government departments' COVID responses. So we have such as the Department of Education, Skills and Employment, we have the Department of Health, we have links to the Overseas Student Ombudsman and the Department of Home Affairs. We also on this website have information about the graduate and undergraduate certificates. So as part of the government's response to the COVID-19 pandemic, the government funded the development of short courses for graduate and undergraduate certificates for online courses in the fields of national priority. So these fields are such as nursing, teaching, health and science. These courses are 4 units, so 6 months courses, and they're aimed to assist those who were displaced by the pandemic by allowing them to upskill or retrain for future skills or employment. Back over to you, Karen.
So our next step is that we will continue to develop online website materials for the sector. We are also very similar to Dr. Lobner, considering the quality of the student experience of online learning. So we've just put out a request to the sector for us to ask them for copies of their summaries of their student experience surveys from the first semester. And we're going to collate that to look at any trends and to see out of that if we need to develop any more good practice materials for the sector. Online learning is not going away, and TEXA's got a watching brief on where we're going and what we're doing. We believe that most providers will transition to a blended approach to learning in the future. And at the moment, we are supporting providers in their moves to online learning to establish themselves. but we will be expecting to see a quality offering for students, and we know that we are going to have to do more work in that area. We have been talking to lots of our international colleagues about what we've been doing and what they've been doing, and it's been really gratifying to hear that we've all risen to respond to COVID in, I think, particularly challenging time. We've had strong responses, and many of our responses are similar, which I think is interesting, which makes us feel that at TEXA we're on the right track, at least, and we will continue to have a strong focus on academic integrity and contract cheating into the future. So that is a very quick tour of TEXA. If you have any comments, or if there's anything you'd like to know, please send Emily or I an email, and we're very happy to share any information or anything we've developed with you further. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Karen Trelaw and Ms. Emily Good. Your contribution is highly appreciated, especially since it opened our eyes to what is being emphasized by TEXA in order to support the higher education providers in Australia. And I just want to confirm what you were saying in your presentation about the wealth of information that is available on the TEXA website. It is really just amazing, and there's a lot, to learn from. Just to summarize a few points that you mentioned in your presentation, it seems that there is in Australia now, through the efforts of TEXA, a focus on quality enhancement of online learning provided by the higher education institutions. There's also a lot of collection of online learning resources for the higher education sector by the sector itself. There's staff capacity building for online teaching and learning purposes. There's varied administrative and academic support services for students to achieve intended learning outcomes. There's a move toward more authentic performance-based assessment, and there is like a rethinking and reshaping of measures to ensure greater academic integrity in an online environment. And, again, these are concerns I would say are shared by, I guess, all of the higher education institutions and the quality assurance agencies worldwide. You ended your presentation by shedding some light on the next steps, including the continuation of contributions from the higher education sector, the monitoring of online learning approaches as they develop, and the collaboration with and the reaching out to international partners. So thank you very much for that, and very informative, really. There's only just one question that I have received from you, and please, feel free to answer maybe jointly or whoever would like to take a take at this. The question is, what would you say are the most important challenges in the external quality assurance of online programs?
I think in Australia, we've got to get everyone confident in their offerings of online learning. We know that we've got universities who do online learning spectacularly well. We know that we've got some very small providers that we've got to lift the quality up. So I think that's a challenge for TEXA, and that's why we've taken a quality enhancement approach. We're very concerned about the quality of the student experience, and particularly those students who might be dropping through the cracks that we're not catching. So that's why we are surveying our students. We're asking providers for copies of their surveys. I think that everyone finds this whole area challenging because it's constantly moving and we don't know where it's going to land. But I think it also creates a landscape where innovation can occur. So we want to support that innovation as much as we can.
Okay. I don't know if Emily, you have any thing to add because we still have a few more minutes for you. No, you're good? Okay. Okay. Okay, excellent. So again, thank you very much, Dr. Karen Trelaw and Ms. Good. Next, we're going to turn to another overseas presenter, whom we are very fortunate to have with us today. But this time it's going to be from the Netherlands. This is Dr. Mark Fredericks, who is the coordinator of International Policy Flanders with NVAO, Accreditation Organization of the Netherlands and Flanders. Dr. Fredericks has a long, impressive history with quality assurance, having held a number of administrative higher education, quality assurance, and accreditation positions. He currently manages the EU-funded project, EU UniQ, I hope I'm pronouncing it correctly, which is basically a project on the quality assurance of European universities, and is here with us today to present on the international experiences of online reviews. So without further delays, therefore, I'd like to enthusiastically and kindly invite Dr. Fredericks to the floor.
Okay, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. I hope you can see the presentation now. Is it? Yeah. Okay. So I'm indeed from the NVO. This is the Accreditation Organization of the Netherlands and Flanders. Flanders is the Dutch-speaking part of Belgium. And so we are responsible for quality assuring higher education in the Netherlands and Flanders. What I will be talking about is not only the NVO experiences, but also looking at the experiences that European quality assurance agencies had. We had a number of webinars also organized, for instance, by QAN, the Quality Audit Network, which was organized a couple of months ago by NVO. Also a webinar of ENCA and of ECA, European Consortium for Accreditation, where the agencies really shared their experiences with online reviews. So I'm speaking. I'm also in a, well, we have no lockdown anymore, but we had an intelligent lockdown, as I call it, in the Netherlands. But I'm still working from home, also in near The Hague. Maybe just to give you first an overview of what the situation is for European Quality Assurance Agency, to look at the regulations that apply to us. Apart from the national regulations, we have European regulations in the standards and guidelines for quality assurance in the European higher education area. It's this little booklet of the ESG as the abbreviation that is used for that. And there's a standard 2.3, which is about external quality assurance requirements. And this relates to a site visit and says an external assessment, normally including a site visit. So the normally is important here. Of course, we're not in a normal situation now. So this means also that there are possibilities for not organizing a review on site. At the same time, we also have in a number of European countries, there's a distinction between ex ante and ex post assessments. So for instance, when you organize an ex ante assessment for a new program, then there is often, well, at least in some countries, there is no site visit. We had, if you look at the past before the pandemic, online interviews were really quite scarce. So some examples, for instance, if you had professional or international stakeholders who could not attend the site visit, and they participated online, but this was really not very frequently that this happens. In Europe, you have ENQA, which is the Association of Quality Assurance Agencies, and also EQA, the Register for Quality Assurance Agencies. And so if you comply to the ESG, to the European standards and guidelines, and this is verified also to an external evaluation, you're registered in EQA. And so it is also quite important that they are supportive of these online reviews, considering the exceptional circumstances that we're in. At the same time, of course, all agencies have to comply to the national regulations. Sometimes a change is needed to make it possible really to conduct a site visit online, or to conduct online interviews instead of a site visit. So these need to be adapted sometimes, but often this is also a matter of methodology, which then is a responsibility of the quality assurance agency. So what are the options for agencies? Well, one option is postponement of a site visit. Certainly in the beginning of the pandemic, that was something that we really that was and I think also for other agencies that was what we did, because we didn't know, of course, how long it would take, but the longer it takes, the more you see, of course, that you cannot keep postponing these site visits. At the same time, sometimes regulations may have to be changed. For instance, an extension of accreditation periods may be necessary if you want to postpone these site visits. Another option is to have it partially on site if travel is still possible within the country. So, for instance, we had some experiences where we had site visits with only a limited number of people. For instance, the panel chair, the secretary, the agency staff, they were on site, and other experts then joining online, or even maybe some interviewees participating online, for instance, if they were in quarantine. This worked fine. I mean, we did it a couple of times, but it is more difficult to manage if you constantly have to switch between the on-site online mode to let people participate online. This is really also for the agency was more difficult. It takes more time. And also the experts felt, or at least some experts felt less satisfied with that. And it is certainly for longer review, so it may work fine for if it's a half day or 1 day, 2 days, but if it's a longer review, then this would be not such a good option, I think. And then a third option is to have a fully online review, and I come back to that. Well, choosing this option, of course, or for which option you want to choose, is not only a matter for the quality assurance agencies, but it also depends, of course, on the regulations that are in place, but also what the higher education institution, what their requests are. For some, it is more urgent to have an evaluation soon, and therefore choice for online. For others, it is maybe less urgent, and it can we can also postpone the site visit. Could be an option as well. But of course, also the experts' wishes are important, and we have also some procedures where we also place this, as it were, in the hands of the experts, so that they can make a choice in that. Of course, then the agency approve. So what it comes down to is that we have actually different measures for different procedures in the Netherlands and Flanders, because also the regulations in the Netherlands and Flanders are different. The government regulations are Well, if once you have before you go to the decision on what you want to do, the question is really who decides on that? Is that the agency? Are these the experts? Is it the higher education institution, or perhaps also ministry? For instance, we have also a procedure where actually it is commissioned by a ministry. That is a procedure abroad. So it's also, of course, important then what they. So is it online possible for existing and new programs or higher education institutions? That's also an important question, because there you can make a difference. For instance, you could say, okay, for existing programs as we know them already, it's easier to go online, but for new programs, this perhaps an on-site visit is really necessary. Also, if there was previously there was some problems, there was a negative or conditional outcome, then it's also more difficult probably to change to an online review. So basically, there's a matter of trust here also in the higher education institution. And I think this is also something important. Okay, you can say, of course, you always have the trust in your institutions, but I think sometimes you have a situation where you can have a bit more trust than another situation. This can lead then also to some different decisions depending on the type of institution, the previous experiences there were, for instance, and whether it's a new or existing program or institution. Another important aspect is when will the on-site or online decision be made. For instance, we have a kind of an internal rule in NVO that 6 weeks before the site visit, well, we have normally the site visit, the panel should know so that they can prepare also. So in this case, that would also mean, for instance, if there is it is not clear yet whether the situation will improve and on site would be possible, that at least you say, for instance, 6 weeks in advance, we make a decision, go or no go with an on-site or online review. Well, we also have some procedures as NVO in other countries. This is more complicated, the same as if when you do in your own country, you do a procedure with international experts and they have to travel. Well, in Europe, we have a quite confusing situation, actually. It would be good if the European Commission could have the same rules for each country. But it's not the case. Each country makes its own rules. The color codes are also quite different, even between the Netherlands and Belgium. It varies, you know, whether it's orange or red in another European country. This is something to take into account, of course. And it makes on-site, certainly in these cases, more problematic. Also, the insurances are a very practical thing, but it's important, of course, because travel insurances do not cover COVID anymore, at least in our case, and also the liability if something happens is something to consider. So of course we have to comply to all these different regulations in different countries, but also higher education institutions have their own regulations sometimes for traveling for experts, for instance. And if so, for instance, a university that says, well, if it can be organized, the meeting can be organized online, then you should do it online. Well, also the experts themselves have to be comfortable. So it's one thing to comply to all the regulations, but it's also important that the experts themselves, if it is on site or online, that they feel comfortable with it. That's also important, of course, for the quality the review. So in the case that you decide for online reviews, what is then important? Well, the preparation, I think has already been mentioned, and briefing training, of course, they are always important, but it's certainly even more important when you do online reviews. And you're not discussing only the content of the review, but also the approach that you take for the interviews, the technicalities, of course. There are security and confidentiality issues which have to be taken into account. For instance, now this is on Zoom. We had some of the universities had big problems with using Zoom. There was some hacking and so on taking place. So some universities prohibit the use of Zoom. So there's also something to take into account. When it comes to recording the session, well, we tend to say no, because, well, there are privacy issues concerned with that. European regulations are quite strict, so you need to ask everyone for explicit permission before it can be recorded. But also we found that when it is recorded, well, you might think, okay, then that's easier for minutes taking, but there can be actually some discussion about the transcript. Then, if you have the transcript, well, did I mean that? I didn't mean it like this, or something. We notice that between experts. So it's yeah, it can also complicate things if you use it, for instance, for the recording for instead of making minutes. So it's better to keep making minutes of these meetings also. When it comes to the cost, well, of course, many people say it's much more efficient to have online reviews, and it certainly it's true. It saves also on travel time. On the other hand, to say that, for instance, if you have fees for institutions, then for the review, then to use the online as an argument, for instance, to reduce the fees or reduce the budget or the government budget for reviews, for online reviews. I think that's not so easy, because it's not necessarily cheaper. You have of course no travel costs, but it does take more time for experts and agencies also to prepare. So perhaps you could even raise the fees for experts, for instance. It takes them more time. At least it's not a given that it's cheaper. What are some examples of online reviews? Well, I mentioned already we have some experiences with 1.5 day reviews for a smaller program or for a smaller procedure, also accreditation procedures, also for new programs. This can be done sometimes. It's often positive indeed, or it's positive if it's limited in time. When it is longer in time, it's more difficult and more challenging. There are, at least in Europe, very few experiences. I think the QQI in Ireland has done something. Now the University of Ghana, they will for 6 days do a review. At NVO, we say for institutional reviews, we don't do this online, so it has to be postponed. We have now, this is one, well, it's abroad for us, it's in Luxembourg, an evaluation of the University of Luxembourg, where we evaluate the whole universities, but we evaluate the faculties and clusters online during 3 days, and then in agreement with the ministry and the university, we evaluate the institutional level 1 month later. So also kind of a combination that you could make. What are some tips for online reviews? Well, I think obviously online campus tour is not possible, but you could organize something virtually. You could use videos, pictures of facility, rooms, etc. Also, what we do at NVO is to create a platform for our experts, where all the materials are there, but there is also There are explanations about the procedures, videos, and so on, that experts can really look at before they are briefed or trained online. And then yeah, it's also important, of course, you can have guidelines for conducting the online interviews for the experts, but it's important also think about the institutions, and maybe they need some help with that as well. While a topic that about how the higher education institution deals with online education and examination, that's of course very important. On the other hand, and especially how students respond to that. We have currently also a lot of discussion about that in the Netherlands about the student experience, so to say, of online education. I think, though, it is important also to always look back at what the purpose is of the evaluation, and to make sure that the whole topic of this special, what is organized now because of COVID-19, when it comes to online education, etc., this does not overtake the review, that it's not going to dominate the review. So another point, I think, is to be flexible in the review approach and consider also additional interviews if clarifications are needed, because of course, usually if it's on site, then it's when the site visit is over, it's over, and you start to write reports. Now you do have the option to have online interview if some clarifications are needed before you finish the report. So this is something that could be considered. If you look at the online interviews themselves, and I base this also on what I hear from the experiences from other agencies and the webinars that I mentioned, the experiences that we also have ourselves. Of course, you have to determine quite early on which platform to use, and then test it. Also to have a sufficient login time so that everyone is familiar with that. What we think at NVO is important is that the agency is the host. We had some cases where the university was the host, and then this was not, also our experts did not feel always that comfortable with that situation, because you don't know, for instance, what is very important is that experts on site, this happens quite naturally. For instance, in breaks, experts talk to each other. Well, now you have to organize that time online, but if it's hosted by an institution, you don't know really if there's who's listening also, and experts always feel comfortable for that. Also to have an backup for the hosting, that is important, and to limit also the participation to online meetings, for instance, to 8 people. So.
Dr. Mark, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but you have 1 more minute if you can just conclude.
Yes.
Okay,
so to have guidelines for conducting online interviews, I think is important, and also to have make a script for asking the questions. And the time management is another point, I think, that is important. So you cannot just follow the agenda of a normal site visit, but you have to make adaptations, keeping in mind that the concentration for online interviews, it's much more exhaustive and online interviews over a whole day than on site. So maybe you doing it on having online interviews on half days, for instance, or you shorten it in another way. Well, there are several ways to do that, but keep in mind that you will have to change the. So to conclude, I think we're all improvising with online reviews. We're all learning. It's certainly not the same as on site, and that means also, and I think as agencies also, we have to be quite open and frank to that, to the institutions, that we cannot guarantee the same quality of an online review as an on-site review, or that it is completely, because it is not equal. And I think it's important to be open to that. Well, also we have to realize, of course, that we can learn now for how we can include online components in our reviews, and that's important and something that we can use also for the future. At the same time, the current situation is temporary, and we will go back to what it is said in the ESC, normally including a site visit. And so I think that's also in a way a comforting thought, because I think a site visit is, if it's possible, well, it's still a very good way of doing review. So thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Fredericks. This is really, it was eye-opening with respect to the European higher education arena. Through your presentation, you clarified the options that are for quality assurance reviews, stressing that the methodology of the review depends on the quality assurance agency, as well as on the related government's regulations. You also clearly explained some challenges involved when the reviews are conducted in countries different from those of the international experts, thus emphasizing the importance of training and preparation for online reviews in particular, as well as stressing issues such as security, confidentiality, costs, and flexibility. You also included some helpful tips on how to conduct online reviews, interviews, and virtual tours. And I think the best part and the refreshing part is your reassurance in the end that the traditional face-to-face site visits will be back once the COVID-19 situation is over. So thank you very much for that. There is one important question here for you from our audience. This question says, do you think a global effort to have quality assurance standards of universities being converged globally, like a form of global scale, if you like, is needed rather than just to have that on a regional or local level as it is now? And so this is from Dr. or Mr. Mahmoud Brahim. So please, if you can answer this question.
Yes. I assume is that global standards for online?
Yes, yes.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think it would be good for Europe at least if we would have more clarity on that, because as I explained already, we see that it depends a lot from which country you are, what the regulations are to deal with the situation, with traveling and with the quarantine measures, etc. But also when it comes to for instance, site visits, or whether they can conduct it online. So I think there, well, I personally would think that the European Commission, I would very much encourage that if the European Commission could play a bigger role in that, but the situation is that the member states, when it comes to health issues, are really in charge. So globally, so I think for Europe, this is already quite a challenge, but yeah, globally, maybe INQUAHI could, which is the International Network for Quality Assurance Agencies, could play a role in that. I think they have also had some webinars on online reviews and education.
Okay.
So it would certainly be good to have more of a development of that. Yeah, thanks.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you again, Dr. Mark Fredericks. And now, last but certainly not least, our presentation is coming from you know, I mean, it's coming actually at a point that it's very, very much needed because this presentation is gonna focus on the challenges and opportunities post COVID-19 outbreak. You know, so what is next? And this presentation will be delivered by the former executive director of the Hong Kong Council for Accreditation of Academic and Vocational Qualifications, Ms. Dorothy Christopherson. Ms. Christopherson has a strong international profile when it comes to quality assurance, as she's had the chance to hold several senior executive positions in quality assurance bodies in Australia, Denmark, Hong Kong, and the US, with also having some work done on quality assurance boards and panels internationally. So without any delay, Mr. Christopherson, the floor is all yours, please.
Thank you very much. And let me just get the, can you give me an indication that you can see the presentation all right?
Yes, we can. Yes, we can. And
Yeah,
we can hear
but
you. Yes.
Yeah. So we just have to get to the right one. But thank you very much, Dr. Nina, for that very kind introduction, and good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for listening in. Firstly, can I commend the BQA for focusing on this topic? We are, as we have heard already, in a situation that is extraordinary and unprecedented. And I think that it is critically important to be able to be forward-looking, to minimize to the extent possible the disruption that has been caused and will continue to be caused to higher education. And secondly, I would like to thank the organizers for giving me this opportunity to contribute to the discussion and speak on the topic challenges and opportunities post the COVID-19 outbreak. So that was the topic I was given, and I'm going to stick to that topic in what I'm going to talk about. But in terms of challenges for external quality assurance, I will hone in on what might need to be the focus of external quality assurance processes moving forward. And then I'll talk about the organization of external quality assurance processes. And I should probably mention that I'm not, as compared to Mark and Karen, talking from the perspective of a particular country. I'm talking about these challenges more broadly. But I think you'll see now that I've been listening to the previous two speakers that I have identified some of the same challenges that Karen and Mark have identified. When it comes to opportunities, I think they challenges and opportunities may appear as opposites, but I think that it's interesting that opportunities very often derive from or develop out of challenges. So you'll probably see a level of similarity between some of the challenges and opportunities for external quality assurance. And then I'll conclude the presentation with some summary remarks. So what will it be important for the external quality assurance, or what will both important and what could be some of the challenges for external quality assurance to focus on in the processes? The changes that affect higher education equally affect external quality assurance. And as we have already heard, COVID has caused disruption to higher education, primarily because higher education has had to move to the rapid introduction of online learning. And with that has come adjustments to curriculum, changes to assessment practices, but also issues around safety, authentication of students, taking the exams, for example. There have been needs for new types of support for both staff and students, such as access to libraries, also access to different and various kinds of counseling support in a situation that students might find difficult, not only in terms of studying, but in terms of handling the pandemic as such. And as Dr. Javara said in her opening, also in terms of making sure that the IT resources are in place. Some of these changes may persist in the future. Some of them may be changed back to what they were in pre the pandemic. But it's important for external quality assurance and for the processes to consider how these situations, how these changes will be dealt with, how they have impacted quality, how those impacts can be addressed, and what the longer term effects on quality might be. The pandemic is very likely, and I think it's safe to say that the pandemic has had an impact on availability of resources, financial resources primarily. Both national economies have suffered. Institutions that depend on tuition from international students have particularly suffered because of the lack of students' ability to travel. So the impact that financial constraints may have on higher education institutions is something that an issue that external quality assurance will have to look carefully at moving forward. I don't think that it is reasonable to expect that higher education institutions would have planned in detail for the emergence of the pandemic and for all the effects of the pandemic. But any permanent changes that will have to be made due to what has happened will have to be considered in the higher education institutions' missions and visions. And I think that's an issue it'll be important for higher education, for external quality assurance processes to look at. The same applies to planning processes. The planning processes may not have been able to capture all the changes that have been necessary because of the pandemic, but it will be a useful exercise to review the planning processes of institutions, for institutions to do it themselves and for external quality assurance to look at the effectiveness of the planning processes, and especially the internal risk assessment, which would have been critical in the current situation. And I think Karen alluded to internal risk assessment. No, I think it was just Dr. Lochner who alluded to the importance of internal risk assessment in the survey that BQA has undertaken. There may also have been effect or consequences of the pandemic on institutional governance arrangements. For example, have the processes for decision making changed? Have some delegations been introduced because it was necessary to assure that decisions were made, but the usual meetings could not take place? And would be necessary for external quality assurance to go back and work with the institutions to ensure that there are the proper decisions sitting behind the governance arrangements. And that brings me to the last topic on the screen, and that is to look at the effectiveness and rigor of internal quality assurance. That's of course always a really critical element in an external quality assurance process, but I think it is even more important under the current circumstances. And I think where it also is critical for external quality assurance to look at is to ensure that in a situation where higher education institutions may be hit by financial constraints, that there won't be cuts to more administrative matters, and the internal quality assurance could be considered as such. So that was what might be the focus of external quality assurance and some of the challenges in that regard. How are these challenges, these examples of disruption handled in the quality assurance process? I think in that context, the standards that are applied are critical, and there may be a need or an opportunity, depending on how you look at it, for external quality assurance agencies to ensure that the standards that they use have an appropriate level of flexibility, because there may have been some useful experiences come out of this pandemic, and it may be that some of the experiences have provided innovative solutions to higher education that could be introduced and maintained more permanently, and that may require a higher level of degree of flexibility in the standards that that external quality assurance agencies apply. Another challenge will be the organization of site visits, and I think Mark has spoken at length about that. They have been a feature in most external quality assurance processes around the world, but that has been questioned now. And the question, of course, is, to what extent can quality of online site visits be achieved? But I will come back to that when I talk about the opportunities. Also, the use of international peers. Very often, international peers are involved and come on site, and when and that may not be possible for the foreseeable future because borders are still closed, international flights are limited. There will still be quarantine that will be in place for the foreseeable future. So, how can international peers continue to contribute to external quality assurance? There may also be a level of volatility with respect to higher education policy in various countries that may also affect on quality assurance. And just as higher education institutions may be affected by by financial constraints put on by the pandemic, the same may apply to external quality assurance agencies. If national economies are affected, that may flow down to the levels of funding to external quality assurance agencies that are funded by governments. Also, I think it will be a challenge, but an important challenge, that for external quality assurance agencies to provide appropriate, effective, and timely levels of transparent information to all stakeholders, of course, primarily to higher education institutions, but also to students and to employers about the changes that they have had to make, what they have had to decide, and what steps they will take in the future, and how they will have dealt with some of the challenges, and how that might or might not have affected the rigor of the review of quality of higher education. Very practically, and I think Mark alluded to some of these as well, there may be a need for external quality assurance to consider some of the policies and rules, because there can be delays, or may have to be delays in some of the processes or steps in the processes. And I think finally that it will be a challenge for quality assurance agencies in the sort of foreseeable future, because the effects of COVID-19 are not going to disappear overnight. We are going to live in a COVID-19 normal world for a long time, and the effects of COVID-19 are probably going to have a fairly long tail. So what are some of the opportunities that we can get out of the pandemic? And if you agree with the challenges that I have outlined, I think that flexibility in quality assurance approaches is going to be key. And I think there is a valuable opportunity here for external quality assurance agencies to possibly consider some of the approaches long term. Whether, for example, there would always be a need for a full on-site visit, or if online site visit could be something to supplement with. So depending on the issues that would need to be considered for the institution. It might also be possible to consider involving in particular international peers in different roles, so that international peers could do some analytical work, provide their questions, their insight, their perspectives in writing. And there might be an opportunity to think about at a high degree of diversity in the evidence that is used in external quality assurance, such as using videos, photos, giving experts access to the platforms that, for example, the learning management systems. I was very interested to hear that both Mark and Karen highlighted the importance of cooperation with higher education institutions, or the cooperation between higher education institutions and quality assurance agencies in this situation. I think it is important that we put all the resources together, and that we work together to get the most out of both the positive and the negative effects of COVID-19. And as I've already said, I think that, and I want to highlight that again, that although it's a situation we have not wanted to find ourselves in, it is useful if there are ways that we can maintain and further develop the alternative approaches used in higher education during the pandemic, while ensuring the maintenance of academic quality. And finally, as everybody is in the same boat, it is valuable and useful if quality assurance agencies could cooperate about how they deal with the current situation. And Karen gave us some examples of how that is already happening. So to conclude, I think for external quality assurance and external quality assurance agencies, it's important that they stay relevant in this situation, and that is to be up to date with, work with, and follow the developments in the higher education sector, and be flexible in the way that they deal with the issues that higher education institutions are dealing with, so that they don't slow the ability of higher education to provide their services, while they at the same time, of course, ensure that the rapid changes that happen do not put students' qualifications and future opportunities at risk. And to do that, it's important to be transparent about the outcomes for the benefit of stakeholders, in particular students. And finally, and I think it's a shout out to all the colleagues in external quality assurance, that there will be a need to manage increasing workloads effectively, because there, I think for the foreseeable future, will be a need for external quality assurance external quality assurance agencies to continuously consider and adjust their quality assurance processes. Thank you very much for your attention.
Okay, thank you very, very much. Basically, Ms. Doherty, this was really an amazing end, if you want, to the webinar presentations. And I just like to go back and highlight some of the main points that you mentioned. Basically, talking about the challenges in relation to the external quality assurance and quality assurance agencies. Of course, you did mention those related to the disruptions in higher education practices, availability of resources, planning processes, risk assessment and management, and internal quality assurance, rigor and effectiveness. And of course, you also mentioned challenges for the quality assurance agencies, like basically those related to the academic standards and rigor, and ensuring that they are not compromised. You talked about the organization of site visits and utilization of international peers, the financial constraints, and the possible delays in processes. Now, luckily, along with these challenges, you highlighted some opportunities which have, emerged as a result of the COVID-19 situation, and opportunities like the greater flexibility in terms of QA approaches that are basically being maybe implemented by some agencies. There's greater support for emerging approaches in higher education, institutions. There's improved cooperation among the higher education institutions themselves to address the COVID-19 issues, and there's greater cooperation among quality assurance agencies. And this is something that was a part also of your recommendations, calling for more cooperation between different quality assurance agencies around the world. Now, referring to all this, you also mentioned that it's very important for quality assurance agencies to stay up to date with higher education developments, to act with transparency in relation to expected outcomes, to demonstrate flexibility in order not to slow down the work of the higher education institutions, and finally, to take into consideration increasing workloads, whether for students, for staff, or all those involved. So really, this is an amazing way to conclude today's presentations, especially since the recommendations you've given, they help pave the way forward in terms of external quality assurance reviews of higher education, which is highly consistent with our webinar's title and main theme. So I want to thank you for your presentation, and I'm going to check to see if there are any questions, because I know that I have a question myself. I don't see it from the audience, but it was really very interesting when you were referring to striking a kind of balance, if you like, between the quality assurance agencies being flexible in terms of the external reviews, but at the same time, making sure that the rigor and the academic standards are being maintained, and their evaluation also is being done rigorously. So I just wanted to see if you have any concrete examples or tips to how that kind of balance really could be striked. What kinds of things can we be flexible with as external quality assurance agencies, and what not, maybe?
I think that perhaps if we go back to the topic, I think we are in a situation now where there may have been, there's simply been a need for higher education institutions to be innovative and think about how they can get through this process. So to some extent, there's been we've been through a test case. We've had little laboratories of tests, and that might be a way forward to identify these tests that have been made. They may not if you read or look at your standards in Bahrain, for example, technically be able to meet the standards if you take them literally, but there may be value in thinking about looking at whether they have actually worked, have they achieved the outcomes they were intended to, so they would sort of live up to the spirit of the way that any standard is formulated. So I think that that's what is unusual about this situation, because in order to survive, we've had to go through some hoops and be more flexible than we're used to. And that was really what I was thinking about, that we've had these test cases. And I think it's important that quality assurance agencies do not come too hard down on institutions, but evaluate and consider the value of these experiments with the higher education institutions. So that's sort of my answer in relation to the topic we're discussing today. But I think it's always a challenge for all quality assurance agencies that when you have a standards-based approach, and if there are institutions that are very innovative in their way of offering institutions, there will be a clash between the two views on what is allowable and what is not allowable, and it is a role of quality assurance agencies to make sure that academic standards, academic quality is not compromised. So that's important. But there may be a learning from this exercise, or or this may where we can learn from something bad, that how do we actually strike a better balance between ensuring that standards are met and also supporting innovation in higher education.
Okay, thank you very much. And that really is very consistent with our main purpose as being if you want, critical friends here supporting the higher education institutions. So it's just something that really is a learning experience, I guess, for us and also for the higher education sector. Okay, I just want to say one more thing, that basically there were some questions that we were unable to have our panel members address. But what we are going to do is we're going to try to collect all of those and maybe send them to the distinguished speakers if they can answer some of them, and then probably we will forward the responses to the attendees concerned. So we're going to try to do that so that nothing is left out from our program. But because we really have to end the day, we cannot take more questions. So basically, I would just like to close and once more, thank very much all of our distinguished speakers for basically their time, for their effort, for their contributions to this webinar. All the presentations have been wonderful and insightful, and I think all of the presentations gave us some thinking points to ponder upon as we leave this webinar. I also want to send a great deal of appreciation and high regard on behalf of the Directorate of Higher Education Reviews to Her Excellency Dr. Jawahir al-Mdahki, and to the General Director of the General Directorate of Educational and Vocational Institutions Reviews, Dr. Haya al-Manahi, for their continuous support of our Directorate and their guidance. And special thanks also goes out to our distinguished attendees, without whom this webinar would not have been possible. So thank you all for your participation, for your time, and for your questions. You will hopefully be receiving an evaluation form from us to rate this event. So please make sure to send us your honest feedback. We do listen and we do try to improve. And last but not least, a lot of gratitude goes out to all of our BQA colleagues working behind the scenes who've helped us in organizing this important and special event. So again, thank you all, and take care, and please stay safe.